quorum, I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Amherst School Committee at 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, June 27th. First up is approval of minutes. We do not have any minutes to approve this evening, so we'll move on to public comment. And just so folks know, there were no public comment received by email or voicemail. There were some that were received, but they were directed at the regional school committee, so I did not include them tonight. So for folks watching at home, if you're feeling like yours is missing, it's being held for the regional school committee meeting. So with that, I will open up the floor to members of the community who are here who would like to speak. And welcome, Mindy.
Thank you. I brought some prepared remarks because I wanted to make sure that I touched on certain subjects. Thank you so much. Good evening.
Microphone.
And this is my opportunity to say thank you to the members of the school committee for your incredible work and diligence on behalf of our children and our families and our teachers and our school personnel. Thank you so much. I'm here to talk a little bit about, or not a little bit, maybe a lot about the new updated curriculum frameworks in health and physical education that Governor Healy's administration has revealed, and as of this morning has advanced for public comment. I want to talk a little bit about it to flag it for the school committee. I want to talk about it to urge the school committee and members of the public to participate in the public comment process. I know this is an issue that is of great concern to our community because I was asked a lot about it when I ran for office, and also based on recent events, I know that people want to take a very proactive action to support our students, in particular our LGBTQ+ students, and this is a good opportunity to do so. So I'm going to take just a moment if it's okay. I don't know if I'm time limited, so.
I'll just interrupt and I'll just look to the committee if folks are amenable to releasing our 3-minute time limit for public comment, given that we have nobody else here. I'm seeing head nods. Okay, go ahead.
And I should say, by way of introduction, I'm the state rep for the 3rd Hampshire, which includes the town of Amherst, sadly no longer the town of Pelham, but the town of Amherst and half of Granby. So just as by way of my background, prior to becoming a state rep, and before I was working at the Amherst Survival Center, I oversaw some statewide programs that were involved HIV and health education and support for LGBTQ+ students throughout the state. In particular, I was the acting director for a program called the GLIS Project, which stood for the Gay and Lesbian Support Project for the state of Massachusetts, which worked with educators and other youth workers to figure out the skills and content and knowledge that they needed to be able to be of support to LGBTQ+ students. And the whole project was based on the research finding that some of you may have heard me repeat in other settings, where the research shows that one supportive adult makes all the difference for an LGBTQ+ student in terms of resilience, in terms of being able to sort of avoid health risks, etc. One caring adult, that's all it takes. And so the GLIS project was really based on this premise that we could train folks and people could be that one person. And from what I've seen in Amherst in the past couple months, we have more than one person who wants to care for LGBTQ+ students, so that's a good thing. And hopefully these revised curriculum frameworks provide a way for people to also express that care and concern. So the importance of relevant health education cannot be understated. Many of you know about the Healthy Youth Act. That's been a bill that was kicking around the House and the Senate for about a decade. It wasn't moving in the House or the Senate, wasn't crossing the finish line. And that bill was like what I would call the low-hanging fruit of health education. It just said that if a school district was providing health education, if a school district was doing it, then it had to be medically accurate, age appropriate, and inclusive. So it didn't require it, and it just sort of put out these 3 pillars, which I think we'd all agree we want to make sure health education is. But the Healthy Youth Act wasn't really advancing. It wasn't moving through the legislative process the way many of us would like. Come to find out last week that DESE has been working for about 5 years to update the health and education curriculum frameworks. And what the last time they were updated, you should know, was 1999. So it's been 25 years since they've been updated or so, nearly 25 years. And it took Governor Hurley about 6 months to update them. And so they've been released. You know, I really want to stress this, that in order for health education to be effective, it has to be relevant. And it has to be very specific and extremely clear. I also believe that it should involve the partnership with families, and so I'll talk a little bit about that later. But when I did run for office, many people asked me about the Healthy Youth Act, and they specifically wanted to know where I stood on it, if I would support it, if I would work to advance it, and a lot of people in our community wanted to make sure that I did. And I did then, and I continued for the past 4 years. But it took DESE releasing these frameworks last week for it to actually move. So this morning, the board reviewed it. They had a small public comment period during their meeting, and they voted unanimously to advance the frameworks that they had developed into a public comment period for the next 60 days. Now, I was hoping to get the information on exactly how you could participate in the public comment period, but it hasn't yet been posted since they just voted on it this morning. I will get that to the committee, but they indicate that they'll be accepting public comment, I think, in both a survey form and in written form. So I'm hoping that the school committee and individual members will participate. Everybody at home who's concerned about it, I hope you'll participate. If you need to know how to participate, you can feel free to email me at mindy.dom@mahouse.gov. And as soon as we have the information on how people can participate, we'll send it out. It's really important. As you know, and based on who's behind me, the summer is a very slow time in Massachusetts and in our district. And people are not engaged with what's going on in the classroom. And sadly, that can mean that that space, that vacuum, can be filled with people who oppose these frameworks and not give people who support them an opportunity to speak up. And so I'm really urging folks in our community who I know are concerned about it to participate in this public comment process. It'll last for 60 days, and then DESE and the board imagine that it comes back to the board. DESE staff sort of review the comments, they consider them, they make any potential changes to the draft, and then the board is expected to vote on them in the fall. And quite frankly, we want them to look a lot like what they look like right now because they're fantastic. I'll talk about that in a second. So 25 years is a long time, and maybe not so long. I looked up on Google today, so what was going on in 1999, just to give us a little touchstone. The #1 song was by Cher, Believe. The best picture at the Oscars was Shakespeare in Love. The impeachment of President Clinton concluded. Blackberries were a thing, iPhones were not invented, and in fact, iPods weren't even yet invented, so that just gives you a sense. Sadly, there is also another milestone in 1999, which is relevant to the frameworks in some respect, and that's that the Columbine High School massacre happened in 1999. And the reason why I mention it here is because part of what's addressed in these new frameworks is not just health and physical education, but safety issues, and gun safety issues are specifically identified because they're relevant, right? Our students know about them. They hear about it. They do drills, so we need to address it. The curriculum frameworks are online, so people can actually, if you Google Massachusetts DESE, D-E-S-E, health and phys ed frameworks, you may get the 1999 ones, but if you put 2023, the new ones should come up. And again, the relevance is really important. So what we have with the new frameworks is we have not only discussed topics that are relevant, but we have met the requirement for medical accuracy, age appropriateness, and inclusivity. And the fact that they've just included those three pieces as well as other ones shows that we only needed the legislation because the administration wasn't doing it. Now that the administration's doing it, the legislature can take a seat back, hopefully watch how they get implemented, and then legislate as accordingly to tweak, and I'll talk about that in a moment too. So they have divided this with having standards. Each standard has two components: a performance component on how to apply information and a concept or knowledge component. And I love this as somebody who did adult learning and adult training. This is exactly what we want to see in a curriculum: information and then how to apply it. And not only how to apply it, but understanding that the context of application can be challenging. What can be challenging? Exploring that with students. How can decision-making be altered? How can you decide one thing in a classroom, but it gets changed when you're in real life? And how do you accommodate for that? All of that is embedded in this curriculum, which I think is going to be really effective and very positive for youth. There are 7 practices that they want youth to sort of address. So they have 9 topics, but within those topics, they want specific practices to cross topics. And if you will give me a moment, I'm going to pull this up so that I can give you an example, because I know I'm not probably explaining it. So for example, a practice would be decision-making and problem solving. Another practice might be self-management and goal setting. Another one, social awareness, relationship, and communication skills. Another one, self-awareness and analyzing influences. Another one, information and resource seeking. And the last, self-advocacy and health promotion. So those are practices that cross a range of health topics. And the topics are ones that you would expect to see: healthy relationships, mental and emotional health, nutrition and balanced eating, personal safety, physical activity and fitness, gender, sexual orientation, and sexual health, public community environmental health, and substance use and misuse. So you take those practices, then you apply it in those topic areas in age-appropriate ways across K through 12. And the age-appropriate categories, I think, are K through 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, and 9 to 12. It's real. I mean, I was looking at the frameworks and I was just thinking, this is terrific. I think some people will latch on to specifically, why are we talking about sexual health and gender and sexual orientation? That's one topic out of 9. And I want to remind not just the committee, you may not need the reminder, but just the community, that this is the one area where parents, according to the Massachusetts general law, parents get to opt out. So they could opt out of specific classes or specific topics. So I wanted just to mention those topics, which I think are terrific. I want to give a shout out at this point, because when I looked at the topics and they have like healthy relationships, I want to shout out the middle school group in Amherst, the POSH group, as well as Generation Ratify Amherst, who have developed sort of a curriculum of sorts that they would like to see, or at least topics that they'd like to see addressed for middle school students on the topic of sexual harassment. So our students in this district are already moving ahead. They're saying, yes, we want to do this. And they want to do it to reflect the real experience of middle schoolers. I had a really interesting conversation with students in the middle school at one point in the past 2 years, where I said, so what does sexual harassment look like in a middle school environment? Because I didn't know what was being said or what was being done, and it was quite revealing. I also want to shout out Pelham Elementary. They've had a program for K through first grade, I think, a couple of years ago, that I went to go hear a little bit about, that was really terrific, that had something that I think I'm going to recommend and potentially file a bill on, that Massachusetts should have as a whole, and that's a parent or a family component. And I think this is really important. I'd like the school committee just to consider this as this curriculum rolls out. We have to remember that parents have never received this information. We're thinking, well, yeah, our kids need this, but really, we all need this. And parents also need the skills on how to communicate this information with their kids. They need to know what conversation starters, they need to know how to bring their values to those conversations, what their goals for their kids might be with these issues. And I really strongly recommend that we think about doing a parent sort of side-by-side program. It could be, virtual now, it could be through Zoom, but something that gives parents the same information that their kids are getting, but also the skills on how to talk with their kids. shared with people that I see this a lot like the fire safety program that's in the 4th grade in Amherst, where kids learn information and then they have a homework assignment and they have to go home and create a fire safety plan with their family. What would you do if there was something? Where would we meet? Et cetera, et cetera. I feel like on a lot of these issues, we need to create personal safety plans, and it gives parents and guardians an opportunity to have that conversation. And perhaps that might make parents feel more comfortable having their students stay in the class instead of opting out. So I'm here to really urge the committee and our community to take the next step, which is to participate in the public comment period. You're welcome to reach out to me, and I will send the frameworks to folks, as well as hopefully the information on how to participate in the public comment period. I did send links to the email address that have the frameworks themselves, as well as the organizational structure. And that's it. I'm open to questions.
I think, so this isn't an agenda item, so technically we can't deliberate on this topic. But I will use my prerogative as chair to let us ask clarifying questions if anybody has any questions. Irv.
So, the practices and topics. When I look at that, I look at a continuum, and I say practices and topics to curriculum, to lesson plan, to teaching methodology, to evaluation. All of this involves an implementation strategy and tactics. That is the hurdle that I think that all school systems will have to go over, and getting that kind of guidance will be critical.
I completely agree. So I think what you're getting at, Irv, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, is how are we going to help teachers figure out the resources and curriculum they can use to address these issues? Because that's left up to the district, right? The DESE makes these broad kind of goals, which are great, actually, but the way a school district implements them is up to the school district. They already have resources available for schools because in the process of developing the draft, they've come up with a lot of resources they can lend. But I think one of the things I may in fact be filing is a bill that would set up a trust fund to provide for professional development for faculty and school districts, which would either include training, curriculum, and resources that they could use, and could also be used to support this parent, family, guardian kind of accompanying track. They don't, right now there is no money attached to this. This is just ideas, but I think you're right that in terms of implementation, it's going to take money. It takes access to resources, and sometimes that takes money. And teachers may also need to be trained, not only on the content, but also on how to communicate it. And that's going to take professional development. The good news is, in Massachusetts, there are a lot of great resources for trainers and curriculum development on these topics. We will not have to look far to be able to access that. Is that what you had in mind?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because any curriculum implementation coming into any district is quite a big deal. And because it involves the entire school community, from parents to teachers to students, et cetera. And that's something that I think is really good, because during that process, there's a lot of learning going on and a cross-fertilization going on. And teachers get to refine the kind of methodologies they're going to be using in the classroom in terms of actually putting it into practice.
Yep, and they get to learn from each other.
Yes.
So just a reminder to please try to refrain from speaking to the topic and try to limit ourselves. No, you may, but I think limit ourselves to asking questions.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just conscious of OML because this was not on our agenda. So,
right.
Jennifer.
Mindy, I think you said something to the effect of you are pleased with the curriculum frameworks the way they are, and you hope that they're advanced as they are. I'm wondering if there are any areas that you think could be strengthened.
Absolutely, and I'm planning on looking at them very deeply and commenting on them. I guess I can clarify that I'm very much in support of the update that was made to the frameworks. this curriculum has needed an update for 24 years. And it's the last topic in all the topics that were being updated to get updated. Like when you look at world languages, social studies, history, everything is like 2014, 2016, 2018, 2019. You look at health, 1999. It's ridiculous. And so I am very much in support of the fact that this has come out, and it's come out so early in Governor Healy's administration. And it's also come out at a time frame, although I'm sort of not so happy with the summer, but I am happy with the fact that it's before school year starts. But in terms of the specifics, I'll be looking really closely for that information. I can't really say right now what I think I'd want to change. I can let you know. I think one of the things I'll probably put in my public comment is I'll be urging DESE to think about these parent-family parallel tracks. I think that, one of the things I've learned as an HIV educator when I spoke with youth about this a number of decades ago was that one of the things that was kind of dangerous and undermining to education was that students would go home and say, this is what I learned today about like HIV. And parents who did not know about HIV would say, well, that's not true. It's really, and they would correct the information with incorrect information, with their belief instead of the facts. And so I think we need to be very aware with health and physical education. There's a lot of myths about health, and parents have not received this information. We have to sort of be upfront that it's not just our students that haven't had this. Parents haven't had this, and so we need to educate parents so they can be good, reliable sources of information. They're already very good, reliable sources for their values and for their goals and for their, what they want for their children, which is fabulous, but we need to sort of integrate that with the information. Otherwise, we'll be working at cross paths, but I'll keep you posted. Let me know what you think, too.
Peter?
Yeah, I just briefly thank you. And do you have a time frame where you think you might be publishing like your reaction to this? The reason I ask is because I took a quick look at the document this morning, and it's pretty long and structured, and there's not a super easy executive summary or take home, which for a topic this comprehensive is understandable. But I think in order to try and generate as much public, informed public response, whether that's positive or negative, it sounds like you think it might be mostly positive. I think people are going to need a little bit of cueing to understand, where somebody who's really locked in and informed about this, like yourself, comes from. So I think that might be really helpful, and maybe in addition to like your own personal public comment that you submit. Maybe just pointing out sections of the document that you think might be of particular interest. There's several sections that go through those, I don't know what you call them, the practices about how to approach the topics that are practices that you could approach any topic with, right? And so it initially feels like, what, is this actually a health curriculum? And then you get to the actual topics and say, okay, but you can get lost a little bit in the document I found. So just maybe some cues of like, if you're interested in this topic, you want to check out this section that's on page 17. Just little things like that.
I love that.
Any way to eliminate the friction to overcome the obstacle you talked about, which is people are it's the summer, they're on vacation, attention might not be as focused.
I love that. We'll look at that, and we'll try to do a section by section, and there may be other organizations that are also doing that. So I think, for example, some organizations that participated in the advisory board were, sort of like the usual suspects around sexual and health information. So it might be Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, the MTA was involved, but there's also these other organizations that are very deeply rooted in health education that were involved. And I know what you're saying, that it can seem kind of confusing because it's a new way of looking at something, but from the health educator's perspective, it's the perfect way to look at it, because really the application of all health information is personal decision-making in a range of ways. Decision-making on where you get information, what information you take in, how you apply that in your life, the skills that you may have to be or don't have in order to use it in your life, your decision-making about when you use it, how you overcome challenges to you, like all of that is part of it. And so I really appreciate the curriculum for that piece, but I think you're right. It can get kind of confusing because it's not the way other people look at that information. think about practices as different ways of applying the information. And what I don't think they do such a great job in that curriculum is, for example, Pelham did when they presented their curriculum, was showing how one issue, although they do it, they give examples of how one practice can look in 2nd grade, 4th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, and 10th grade. And that's extremely beneficial because then you get to see, oh, right, we're not giving 2nd graders the same information as 10th graders because their application of it is not the same. It's not just that maybe they don't can understand it, but their practice is going to be different. So we're tying it to their practice. I love that.
Thank you. So I'm just going to wrap up with one question. So there's the public comment period opens soon now for 60 days.
Right.
So that would be late August.
Right.
And you will share information publicly with us also on how we can participate, but it's likely to be open-ended written comment as well as a survey
Yes.
collecting opinion.
The documents that they post actually make it sound like it's only going to be a survey, but I think it's also going to be that you can send in comments.
And if anybody has questions, to email you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any closing questions? Great. I appreciate you coming out and joining us tonight. It's always, I sort of suspected we wouldn't have a lot, so I knew that the opportunity for us to be able to ask you clarifying questions would be really
That's
welcome. So
great.
thank you.
And if I'll feel if it's helpful, I can come back in September or whenever they actually decide on it and give you an update at that time. But I really appreciate the way that the committee has grappled with a lot of these issues indirectly this year, and I hope that this provides us with another opportunity to show proactive support. It's very important. I know I don't have to say this to folks, but if there's not the voices of people who support this, there will be voices of people who oppose it.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I made note of that for our future agenda planning.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you again for all your great work. Have a great summer.
Thank you, Mindy. Great. So we will close public comment and move on to superintendent's update. So I'll look to Doug for that.
So it'll be very brief. Now that school is over, things are sort of winding down for the current year. Fiscal year ends on Friday, technically. And there's lots of work to do, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in subsequent parts of the agenda tonight. But we're also starting to plan for next year and thinking about, sort of the various things that we need to do to prepare ourselves and to prepare our schools for the coming year. Summer programs are going to get underway. I mean, our friends at LSSE have started already. It was fun to see some little kids in the building last couple of days. It's been, very hot and humid. So, of course, when they get the opportunity to go to the pool, they're pretty excited about that. And so it's nice to see kids and have that energy back in the building, even if it's just an LSSE program and not a regular education stuff. But our programs, our summer programming starts the 5th, which is next Wednesday. So those programs will get underway, and I believe we're in good shape and ready to go with those, and have all the pieces in place for that. And so we're looking forward to that and the continued learning for kids and sports to not have summer loss in their education, and the adults some are taking some breaks. Some people have taken this early part of the summer to go away. Some will do it later in the summer, but organizationally we'll be working on our plans and processes as we go through the summer, and then we'll get back together in mid-August to collect together all the administrators and have our admin week and prepare ourselves more directly at that point for the coming school year. And I think that's what I had for you.
Could you provide an update? I know that there's been a lot of questions about the administrative plan, and I'm just wondering if there's any update on that.
Well, we have one in place at present that involves the current assistant principal at Fort River going to the middle school and a few other changes like that. I will say I'm looking at some other options and sort of exploring that. There's a, I was hoping to perhaps have an answer to that question a little bit more directly at the end of last week. I'm still trying to connect to some people and play out some other scenarios, and so that's still in process. But barring, any real opportunity to make some other changes, we do have a plan in place and it's been started, and so some planning and efforts have started and will continue to go. And obviously, if we make any changes to that plan, we'll have to do it as soon as we can, just so people have an opportunity to sort of reset and move forward with what they've already gotten underway.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, then we'll move on. Thank you, Mindy. Chair's update, I do not have an update for this evening. So any school committee announcements or updates? Good. Moving right along to new and continuing business. First up is our FY23 budget update. And there's a memo attached to the agenda item, and I'll look to Doug to speak to this.
Hopefully you can kind of read this a little bit, but nonetheless, this is a typical excuse me, action step that I'll have you take at this time of year. Sometimes if we don't quite have our picture together, we'll do it in August, but as managers of the budget in the broad sense, if we need to move funds between budget areas in order to sort of balance out our budget, that requires authorization of you all. While we still have quite a bit to figure out with regard to finishing up the fiscal year, there's some general things that we know we need to do, and so the top 5, budget areas are ones that need a little more support. So we're estimating what that level of support is going to need to be. Those in the bottom section, and I'm not going to count right, I think it's about 7 or 8, have a little resource available. Obviously, control accounts were for the purpose of supporting the budget, particularly around tentative agreements with the APEA and our other unions. And so what this does is try to bring some balance to our budget. It's not to a penny kind of circumstance, but to provide some resources for some areas that need some support, and then identify those areas that have some resources available to provide that support. So it's just a sort of shift we typically do to sort of balance out our budget to finish out the fiscal year.
I do have one question. You mentioned control accounts are used for exactly these kinds of things, but also in this particular year to hold reserves for pending open contract negotiations with multiple unions. So presumably this $245,000 that we're pulling out of control accounts is not the full amount of the control account, or is it?
It's a fair amount. So in our control account, we had sort of 2 different pieces. One was in the sort of, if you think about it, control accounts as being an area of budget expense, things like revenue or other revenue sources subtract from that. So, the amount so there's a piece of that that's smaller because we were applying some of the ESSER funds, the sort of grant funds, to lower that number. So this is, sort of appropriation spending that's available to be used in other parts of the budget. But the intention here and the estimations here are factoring into some degree, the tentative agreement that's still, to be ratified. So, a bit of maybe wishful thinking. I don't know. I don't want to say that. I should say expectation that it will potentially be ratified by both the school committee and the union. So that is factored into some of that movement of funds and resources as well.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, I will move that we modify the FY23 operating budget by making budget transfers between cost centers as shown in the Finance Director's memo dated June 27th, 2023. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Ben. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, then we will vote, and I believe this is a simple majority, so all those in favor? And the motion passes unanimously 5-0. Next up is the FY24 budget update. And just as a reminder for folks, which actually it's spelled out in the memo, thank you, Doug, that the budget that we as a committee passed on March 14th called for an additional sum of money of approximately $80,000. When the town council finalized and voted on the budget, that they did not include that $80,000 that we had requested. Tonight, what we're just looking at is just going back and looking at the budget given what our final budget appropriation is from the town council. So I'll look to you, Doug, if there's anything that you want to.
Not really. I think
Describe or add.
the one thing, and I'll scroll to this a little bit, I think that, so this sheet here, which has what you saw back in March when you actually voted the budget, we knew at that time that the town of Amherst was increasing the amount of appropriation to the district by 0.5%, which added about $125,000. At the time, the superintendent and I, given that the contract negotiations were still underway, sort of put that into the contingency section of the budget. And so that's why that number is as large as it is, because it was bumped up by that additional 125. And of course, that carries, most of that is relative to accommodating contract negotiations and the impact of those on the budget. And so while we have a tentative agreement, I didn't go back and put it into the chart here, the impact of that. What I will say is that overall impact is noticeably significant, and so it really, and so that's sort of the second paragraph in the memo to you, is that the suggestion as part of the motion when you passed the budget originally was potentially to restore some positions that had been in our adds and cuts list. And the sort of really short story version of this is, given where the tentative agreement landed and what that's going to cost us for the coming year and projection of that, we won't have the resources to do that. That's a really sort of short way of saying it. That what I did here that's a little different than what you said on March 14th is that I'm showing the sort of combined additions and reductions that reduced the overall budget by the $894,367. I think if you look at and we've added that to the packet, this adds and cuts, it may say 366 instead of 367. It's sort of an artifact of rounding, to some extent with the town. But, these sources of funds that are going to help provide some of that resource that aren't appropriation funding, so ESSER funds in particular, that helps reduce our budget it reduces our appropriation budget because we fund it with other sources. Other things like no sabbatical requests, that's $30,000 we traditionally hold in our control accounts that we don't need to for the coming years because we didn't have any staff turnover related to what's in the lower part of this chart, which is reduction of staff, 17 staff. We have some other associated costs like benefits, et cetera, that sometimes accompany those reductions besides just the salary reduction, so we capture that there. But because we have those things, then we can reduce our use of school choice. So that's sort of an upside down thing. It sort of adds to that means the appropriation has to carry more of the budget, and so that's the $71,000 is less school choice is going to get used, therefore more appropriation, so they kind of counter each other a little bit. And of course the bottom section on reductions, which we talked about a little bit, is some of these were ESSER funded, and so that's why there's not dollars associated with it. Some of them were reductions to staff that were funded and would have been funded this year by appropriation, so those are reductions. And that's how we get to the $894,367 or 66, depending. But that addition reduction was not in your previous version of this, but that gets us to a full budget, which includes projection, reduction of staff, all sorts of external funding that help reduce our appropriated budget. And so that 25,933,095, did read it right, right, even though I didn't have my glasses on, is the number that was officially passed by the town council on the 12th of June, which is a 3% increase over the fiscal '23. And hopefully I didn't just confuse everybody tremendously with that rambling discussion, but
I'm just gonna, before I open up questions, just to clarify, because we spent a lot of time talking about this particular table that adds reductions, because it does get confusing for people to see $0 amounts for and sort of the nuances of removing the ESSER funding and using the ESSER funding in different areas, which means so I already segued in it. So I just want to try to say in plain language what I recall this is saying, in case folks are if anybody's watching, confused about this, which is we had been using the ESSER funding in the current budget year to fund multiple positions in our district. And so their salaries were not showing up on our appropriated budget, but because they were funded from this outside source.
That's right.
Because we're now using and applying ESSER funding to support our budget because our level services would be a 5.3% increase, and we're only getting a 3% increase. Right. We are now going to be using ESSER to support ongoing functions, which means we no longer are able to fund these positions with the ESSER funding. So that's why the teacher and interventionist, receptionist, and paraeducators are showing zero to a certain extent, or only 60,000 in this, because this is the reduction to the appropriated budget that's funded by the town of Amherst.
That's correct. So
Okay.
The way I try to think about this chart in particular is when you have dollar values associated, it's an impact either positive or negative to the appropriated budget. And so positive numbers are increasing the budget, making it sort of a higher number, and negative numbers decrease that. So given that we had our level services at 5% and change, and the funding available to us in our appropriated budget was only 3%, we had a gap. That gap was about $894,000, and so we're looking to identify on here the reductions to appropriated spending.
Great.
Or additions to appropriated spending. So,
Thank you. Peter.
So, a couple things. First, I just wanted to comment that to express publicly pretty significant disappointment in the town council's decision. So this is the second year in a row in which our committee has had a modest increase over our allocated percent from the town of Amherst. Last year, I believe it was 50-something thousand. This year, it was 84,000. And both times, it's been rejected. And as we've discussed at length before, this is, with the history of this committee being exceptional fiscal partners to the town in terms of always coming in at the allocation and trying to use as much ESSER funding as possible in our operational budget, which, as we've talked about a lot as well, comes with significant risk, given that it's not going to be there in the future. I was also disappointed with the discussion at the town council and its committees about that we didn't make the educational case for the additional funds. We went to great lengths in our multiple discussions of this budget to talk about exactly what we were going to restore with the additional funds in terms of classroom teachers and paraeducators. So I really don't understand that argument. I was happy to hear the town manager talk about forming a new group or in working committee or whatever he's calling it to talk about fiscal sustainability of the schools. And so I think any increased attention and community discussion that we have about the fiscal health of our schools is going to help, again, given that we are about to enter this period where we were going to face significant budget constraints without the help of ESSER. So we move on now, and we do the best that we can. And just to close the loop on that comment, I'm looking at this sheet, and I know that it is confusing with all the asterisks and the appropriations and whatnot. But the line that really sticks out to me is regular ed classroom teachers, reduction of 4, at a total reduction of 260,000. I mean, there's no asterisks on that line. These are classroom teachers that are being reduced. It's going to have a direct impact on students. We heard from Crocker Farm Principal Derek Shea last meeting that was his significant concern, and that he had heard that from parents. So I hope that the future town councils take notice when the school committee talks plainly and directly about the educational impact of our budgets. So I guess just a quick clarifying question, Doug. So when you talked about in your memo the impact of the higher than expected contract costs, anticipated contract costs for the expected to be ratified APEA agreement, did you mean that ate into not only the 84,000 that we had proposed, but beyond that?
Right. So, if you recall the sort of history, we were thinking it was going to be a 2.5% increase from the town as far as appropriation from the council, and that moved up to 3%, and that difference was at $125,000, and that's really what got tucked into that 727 that's highlighted in yellow. There is it includes that 0.5% of increase, and so if the town had appropriated the additional 84,000, it's very likely that we wouldn't have been able to restore positions as well. I think it will be, and it's still early days. I mean, the fiscal year hasn't even started yet, but nonetheless, I think from the start of the fiscal year, given where we think we're going to be, we'll be keeping a very, very close eye on our budget all year long, because I think some of those, and that's not disparage the tentative agreement at all. It's very, deeply thought through and strongly negotiated, I guess is a good way to describe it, agreement, and we're hopeful that that the union will support it, and but it is at a level of requirement that's going to be a little higher than what we had budgeted, but there are a lot of unknowns in our budgets at the beginning, and so we'll see what and how we might economize in some other areas to accommodate, and obviously we'll pay people what we negotiated we'd pay them. But we'll be needing to keep a very, very close eye on our budget all year, just because I think when we were forming our budget and where we ended up in our negotiations were a little different. And I don't want to declare it horrible, terrible, rainy, awful circumstance at all. I just we just need to be vigilant, like we generally always are, but especially so this year, just as we get going, because we were putting a budget together previous to having all the sort of information. So we were working with our best guesses of things, and so we'll have to be just extra diligent and conscientious as we move through. I did want to mention one other thing. Speaking of that group that the town manager had suggested, and a few folks in the schools are going to meet with a few folks with staff from the town. We're looking for dates in July to have a first meeting. So hopefully in the sort of third or fourth week of July, we'll get together for the first time. And, we're looking for, areas of synergy and efficiency that we can put together. And, sort of all ideas are open and welcome. So if you have any, please feel free to share them. Because I think that, and I think it's helpful to the town as well. I mean, I think that, separate from, school's the biggest chunk of their spending, but at the same time, there might be things that are uncovered that are helpful to the town as far as the structural efficiency of their budget. Hopefully it'll help the schools more significantly. And so any and all ideas that are helpful to creating efficient and sustainable budgets for the town and schools is on the table, and hope for as we work through that.
I have two questions. One is sort of building on, the first one's more of a comment than a question, which is building on Peter's observation about sort of disappointment. I too share that profound disappointment with the town council for its recent vote, and particularly in light of the fact that probably mere days after voting that and turning us down with our specific declaration that we wanted to use that money, and I want to be clear, it was to preserve positions, not restore positions, because those positions hadn't yet been
Right.
reduced. So to preserve specific staff positions, educator positions in our district, that's what we intended to use that for. And mere days afterward, the town council is evaluating and exploring paying themselves a larger amount. Now, it's not the full $80,000, but still the slap in the face, if you will, of sort of turning us down in order to preserve educator positions that are direct impact on our students, and stating that it's because we have even increases across all the different departments, and yet right afterward, it's discussing increasing the spending in the town budget to a greater extent than the other departments. So I just want to register my disappointment with that eventuality. But my question for you is regarding that that coordinating group, because when we had asked the question, so is it there's no elected officials involved in that, or the budget coordinating group is not part of that?
Not currently. I think the sort of idea, I mean, well, we haven't started meeting yet, but the core staff are going to be staff. And so we're going to look at all of our, operations and functions and duties and responsibilities and all of that. I think we feel we can be most efficient in getting to a place. I think once we get some ideas, then it'll be a much broader conversation, I'm sure, at that point, because it'll require buy-in from, budget coordinating group, school committee, town council, because it'll require, if we have some actionable items, they'll typically involve significant changes to budget and shifts in ways in which things are funded and staff are resourced and all of that sort of stuff. So I think those will all be, very publicly sort of run through the usual channels, as it were. But I think to start with, the idea is that the staff know the nitty gritty the best, and so that's the way they're going to we're going to start and try to find out those places where we think we might be able to find some economies and some efficiencies.
Right, thank you. Irv?
Yeah, it feels a lot better to me to know that it's just staff, because first I was alarmed. Because I thought, what does this mean? Will they start being a part of our budget-making process within, which we have authority over, is our, the school committee. So I was alarmed by it. So I'm a little bit more at ease now that you've said what you've said. And I will look as this goes forward so that I do, so that there is really no kind of creep into school committee territory. Of course, we're open to all kinds of suggestions. We're an outside group. Some members of the group outside looking in could provide some valuable input. Maybe, maybe not. As long as it stays there, I would hate to see this get to a point where now is an interagency group that includes not only staff but elected officials. That would be something that I would really oppose.
Jennifer?
So I want to make sure I understand what Allison was explaining earlier. Can you show the additions and reductions attachment? So this section, the budget reductions, the reason there are not figures in all of the line items is because those line items were previously funded by ESSER funds.
Correct.
And part of that bottom line as well. But for example, the library paraeducators those positions existed before ESSER was a thing. So were they moved to were they moved to ESSER funding at some point, and now
No, I
or
think,
is it just a number of paras were funded by ESSER, and now that we're reducing?
right. So to be specific, that there are three. There in the current year that just finished, there were three, one in each elementary school, library paraeducator, and so those three positions are reflected in the $60,000 to the right that reduces the budget. The other seven were ESSER funded.
Oh.
So generally, so that 60,000 is showing the impact of appropriated funds by virtue of the staff that were being reduced.
So 60,000 represents 3 library paras?
It's a conservative estimate, but yes.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing to keep in mind is it doesn't represent the three people who had those jobs, because, those folks are all a little more senior. And so they'll have, no one's losing a position. We're going to use attrition to sort of actually shift that around. But so the folks that are most likely to be leaving us, most likely, but also being affected, positionally, would be people at the lowest end of the scale, because they'll be the least years of service and, those kind of things. So that's why the number's that size. It's not the actual salary of the three people that work in our library this last year.
Thank you.
And I think building on that, because there's been some talk at least in prior public comment and letters, that the library paras are listed as a separate line item, but they're not. Is that correct? They're at least in here, because if I look at the budget document in the memo, there's just payroll accounts, and they roll up to regular instruction, special ed, and the other aspects.
Yeah,
So
if we were to look at, and I brought it up on screen here, if we were looking at they're going to be in the regular instruction section. So of that, 6,629,191 for regular instruction, that's teachers, paraeducators, et cetera, that are included in that.
Yep. Okay. Great. And I just want to restate something that you said, and we talked about this before, but just these are cutting of positions, not necessarily humans or people, right? That in many cases, if not most cases, these are the positions, and people that are holding some of these impacted positions will be offered the opportunity to move to other areas within the school because of attrition in other areas. Okay.
Yeah, especially in the paraprofessional or paraeducator group, that would be true. I don't think there's any actual loss of staff that, because there's a number of people that resigned at the end of the year, and so there's opportunities there. In the 4 teachers that are shown, we might have lost one actual person that we had to say, unfortunately, we don't have a position for you next year. The others were accommodated by retirement, reassignment, et cetera. But I think we might have had one, not 100% certain on that.
Okay.
Generally, in any case of these, kinds of reductions, whenever possible, we try to preserve positions and people's jobs. They may not work in exactly the same place they did before, but we try to accommodate as best we can the work.
Any other questions? Peter?
Just a small point of clarification. So on the paraeducator line, where the conservative salary estimate, so these positions again are hourly, part-time hourly school year positions, right? So 6.5 hours a day, 180 days a week, 180 days a year.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's not some derived rate assuming 52 weeks, 40 hours. That's
No. So our paraprofessionals are paid for 191 days. So there's 11 holidays that are included in the pay, and potentially others depending on how the calendar falls a little bit. But 191 is how we budget, 6.5 hours a day.
Any other questions? Jennifer?
Allison, I'm just noting that this agenda item is not listed as a motion or a vote, which isn't to say we can't do the vote, but it's noted as a budget update and then a discussion. But then in the document, there's a suggested motion. So I just wanted to ask because this is as important as when we first voted on the budget, and I just wanted to ask if in the future we could be more careful about naming things as motions and votes. Thanks.
I appreciate that. And I apologize, I hadn't noticed that until you just called that out.
I apologize for not getting you the memo until this morning, but it crossed my mind as I'm putting this together and trying to explain the difference between what you guys voted, what the council voted, and the fact that you needed to actually take action. That's the only reason there's a motion on the memo to you, because it actually, I realized, you actually have to formally vote to change the budget because you need to have it match the funding that you have available to you. And if I thought about the other piece, which is yours, which is like, it's more than just an update, I would have made mention of that as well.
With that, are folks comfortable voting on this? tonight? Peter?
I mean, it's never a comfortable act to be voting this kind of a budget, but yes, I'm ready to vote on it tonight.
Then I will move that we modify the FY '24 operating budget to $25,933,095.
Second.
Moved by Allison and seconded by Irv. Is there any further discussion? Jennifer?
So I just wanted to say that I'm not going to vote in favor of this budget. I hear everything that Doug is saying about the financial challenges we're facing. I understand as much as I can all the nuances regarding the budget. But I think that cutting the library para positions is not the best way to address it. Our librarians and our library programming are one of the things that sets Amherst apart from other school districts, and some of the things that make us attractive to school choice families, and some of the things that make Amherst families stay in our district. And I think it's short-sighted to eliminate the library paras, which will adversely affect the library programming. In addition, I think specialist teachers and paras hold a special position in our schools in that they have the potential to interact closely with students across multiple years, possibly for all 7 years that a student may be in a school, something that classroom teachers don't even have. And I don't want to do anything to weaken that. So just wanted to make that statement.
Is there any further discussion? Peter?
I'll just say I think I agree with all of the positive things that were just said about the paraeducators. I also feel equally value the other positions that are in our district, and some of which are getting cut in this budget, including the special ed paraeducators and the 4 classroom teachers. I think it's near impossible to sort of put those in competition and say which one is better than the other. I don't think that's really and I don't think that's what anybody is saying. But at the end of the day, this is, as we've said multiple years, for too many years we have said this, that budgeting is a harsh zero-sum game, and at the end of the day, we're elected to pass a budget, and we have to pass the budget. And so we have to make these choices the best we can. So Doug, my question process-wise, let's say the committee doesn't vote a budget tonight. Let's say we fail to make this motion. Like, procedurally, what happens?
Well, the short story is you don't have the funds to cover your budget, and so that the difference between what you originally passed, basically that $84,000, would have to be made up with something else, and I'm not really sure. Other than that, I mean, it would be an unfunded portion of your budget or of the budget, not your budget, the budget. And I'm not sure procedurally there might be, I'd have to find out what the actual sort of research on that would be as far as what the actions have to be. So I'm not sure, I guess is the short answer.
Peter?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I don't ask because I ask more so that we all have the most information we have, so that we can decide what we're going to vote and if we're going to vote. I don't feel like the situation would change substantially, and I think our district is fiscally served by passing a budget. So that's why I'll vote in favor of it tonight.
Jennifer?
So, well, it's true that we do have to vote. We do have to pass a budget, and that's part of one of our responsibilities. We don't have to vote on. We don't have to pass this budget. And in fact, the last time we voted on the budget this year on March 14th, 2 of us voted against it. So we don't have to vote yes on this budget because we have to pass a budget. We can choose to vote no on this budget and pass a different budget.
Well,
Irv?
I would like to end this discussion and vote.
I'm seeing nodding heads. So I'm going to call the question unless somebody wants to challenge that. No. So the motion on the table is to modify the budget to $25,933,095. So all those in favor, please indicate by raising your hand. All those against? Any abstention? No, that was 5. So the motion passes 4-1 and no abstentions. Next up is our future agenda planning. And while we don't necessarily have specific agenda items, I did attach a draft meeting calendar that, thank you to the committee chairs for Pelham and Region for collaborating on this. And Doug for weighing in. So this is the three committee chairs have reviewed this calendar, and so our proposal. So for Amherst, our next meeting would be August 29th. And then our typical pattern would be meeting once per month throughout the school year, with our last meeting June 18th. There is a question, because right now the way calendar is written, has us meeting on November 21st, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. And there's a school holiday on the 22nd, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, and the Friday after Thanksgiving. So the question is that okay? Is it something that we want to tentatively approve and come back at when we're closer to that date? Or do we want to propose moving that now? So it's just a question. We don't have to answer it tonight. Jennifer?
I think we're going to end up moving it. Even, like, I don't have any plans right now, but I feel like we're going to end up moving it.
Yeah. We could tentatively put it to the Thursday, what is it, the 16th?
Definitely going to be moving it.
Okay. So we'll make that adjustment there. So in terms of agenda topics, there is one that we pushed off a couple times now, and potentially could be part of the 29th, which is to look at the funding and support for elementary school field trips to Old Sturbridge Village, given the sponsorship of that organization with a large charter school chain in that region of the state. So it is a question that we do want to come back to. And so we'll want to do it early in the year so that if we do decide to make changes to that, that our school communities have time to adjust and reassess. So that will be one at the beginning of the year. Presumably we'll be talking about superintendent evaluation timeline, as well as setting goals for the year. So that would also be at the August 29th meeting. And either the August 29th or the September 26th meeting, we'll invite Mindy Dom to come back and have a deeper conversation about our health and wellness curriculum. Any comments, questions, suggestions? No? Okay. Then next up is warrant report. I have two. Come on. So I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature Crocker Farm transfer request in the amount of $1,900 for a transfer dated June 15th, 2023, and I signed that on June 16th, 2023. And I, Allison McDonald, authorized by my signature payables in the amount of $467,192.66 for a warrant dated June 12th, 2023. This includes general fund expenses of $238,627.99, revolving fund expenses of $49,613.34, grant fund expenses of $145,515.61, other funds of $32,977.59, and gifts of $458.13. And I signed that on June 21st, June 21st, 2023. And with that, next up is accepting gifts, and I don't believe we had any gifts. So last but not least, I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Allison, seconded by Irv. There's no discussion, so we take a vote. All those in favor? And that motion passes unanimously. We are adjourned. Thank you. Have a good summer. Thank you, Amherst Media.